Yeah, one of my famous mentors on the show calls himself the $1 trillion man. He's got a castle in Scotland, and he used to make fun of me because I'm an engineer from MIT, and my engineers, we're trained to make sure the bridges don't fall down and the planes don't come out of the air. And what it did is it made me risk averse over time, because as an engineer, you're always worried about all the problems. And one of the things he taught me, 10 years ago when he came on the show was, I have to engineer risk into my life every single year if I want the rewards. And so now that's what I think about. So when I ran for mayor, honestly, I just thought it was the craziest thing I could do. And as long as I engineer those risks in my life, I always have much more success. Now I have failures and I have things like that, but unless I'm engineering risk in, nowadays I don't even feel alive. I don't even feel like I'm showing up. And now I know that my default is to avoid it. And now my default is now becoming to embrace it. And now I try to think of what's the craziest thing I can do. We used to have a rule around here is that a year from now, we can't even imagine what London Real will look like, And that's because we're doing something so out of the box that we couldn't even predict we would be there. And if we look to our history from like making documentary movies or, running for mayor, it's like, what? Never would have thought that would happen. So we're trying to always do that. I want to jump into this book. It's called How to Live an Extraordinary Life. It's 65 letters written to your children that are now 1 and 3. We expected a Bitcoin book from Pomp or a book on the blockchain, but you wrote this book. Why? And did fatherhood change you in a significant way 3 years ago that maybe planted those seeds to write something epic like that? Obviously, it's not just for your kids. I guess it's for the world's children. But tell me, how did this happen?
Yeah, so as I've gone through life, I've always kind of kept notes of things that I've learned. I have an Apple Note since I've had an iPhone, and I just keep putting, various life lessons that go in there. And sometimes they're, kind of trite and simple, and other times they're, fairly profound and things that, I can recall without even looking at the note. But I've always had this sense, and I opened the book with this story that when people would ask me when I was younger, what do you want to do in life? What's your plan? I would always make some comment about, well, I got to do it before the age of 35. And I have no clue why 35, but I just used to think there's no way I can live the life that I'm living and live past 35. And, I tell a story in the book of, look, I was in the military. I deployed to Iraq. I probably drove my motorcycle over 100 miles an hour on a highway more times than I want to admit. I, had way too many experiences of being out drinking with your friends and doing dumb things and kind of all the stuff that you would kind of label the quintessential American kid who had a lot of fun. That's what I did. And I don't regret a single second of it. It was awesome. If I could live my entire life over, I would probably go do more of that stuff because it was cool. And I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with my friends. But I didn't think you could live a fast life past 35. And so I always had that date in my head. And when I had my first child, I was 33 years old. And my wife challenged me to write a letter to our first kid. And frankly, the first letter that I wrote was very much like, I'm so excited. You're making me a dad. You're the best. I love you. Let's be best friends. Zero advice, all about like, this is cool. And when her first birthday came up, my wife challenged me to write another letter for her. And so that's how I started thinking, what do I want this kid to know? Can I come up to this 35 thing? What if I don't actually make it past my 35th birthday? How crazy would that be that I actually predicted, that I wasn't gonna make it past 35, whatever. And so I started looking at those notes. And as I started to write the first letter, I realized I want to pass some sort of knowledge on. So one letter turned into 2 to 4, 5, whatever. And so somewhere between 5 and 10 letters, I decided, well, what if this actually was something that was not just applicable to my daughter, could actually be applicable to my son? And then let's take a step further, kind of your thing about like, let's take a risk. Let's go even bigger. What if I just turned it into a book? And it helped that my wife is a former reporter. She is somebody who she had written a book. So maybe there was a little bit of kind of intermarriage competition. I say my goal for the book is to sell one more copy than her now that I know how many she sold. But it was very much like, hey, look, let's take these letters. Let's go and let's see what we can do here. And so I started to write these letters. And 2 things happened that shocked me. The first was I realized I was writing the letters for me, not them, because it was forcing me to have the mental clarity to explain to them, what did I actually learn? How did I learn this? How would I apply it in my life? It was making me better. And then the second thing was I realized that it wasn't just advice for my kids, that I could hand that same book to people I work with. I could hand that same book to people I met in life. It was things that, kind of are timeless wisdom that frankly, none of the ideas are mine, right? That's the beauty of a book like this is you have to live life in order to learn all these lessons. And you just have to be the one who kind of collects them, is able to articulate them in a certain way, and then put that into a book and put it out into the world. And so in writing these letters, I then asked myself towards the end, I said, how do I create a book that is built for the modern society? I want it to be timeless in terms of the content, but it's got to be something that is modern in that somebody's got to be able to listen to the audiobook in 3 hours or less. Somebody's got to be able to open any page and start reading from there and not have to read the book cover to cover. It's got to be a book that is built to survive in terms of the content, not what is the quote on the cover. And so those things fed into this book and created it, put it out in the world. So far, so good. People seem to like it. But what I found the most enjoyment out of is the people who write to me and say, hey, I'm writing a letter to my kid now. Hey, let me show you this thing that I learned. For the next one, you should put this lesson in there. And so that kind of feedback is really what I think is so beautiful about the internet and kind of these digital communities, is that there's a two-way conversation. And that's really the thing now, that every time I get one of those messages, I show my wife and I'm like, man, I'm so glad I took the time to write this book, because I'm learning even more after the book than I did as I was putting it together.
Yeah, you got me thinking about writing letters to my boys now. So yeah, that definitely works. Some of the things that stood out to me were fire boring friends. I'd love to go deeper on that. Compete, don't complain. You can't live an extraordinary life sitting on your couch. Live your life as a documentary, and we're all going to die. Any of those you want to go a little deeper on? The boring friends, I kind of want to hear more about.
Yeah, a lot of people just are friends with people because they feel like they got to be friends with them. But if you want to live an extraordinary life, you can't do it with boring friends, right? You can be friends with a boring person, but the odds, if you hang out every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday with boring people, you're probably going to live a boring life. But if you have friends that one Saturday want to go skydiving, the next Saturday they want to go do this, the next Sunday they want to do this, you're probably going to live a pretty extraordinary life, because your friends are going to force you to do things you might not otherwise do. And so it isn't something where look around your whole friend circle, and if they're not doing epic stuff every weekend, you got to get rid of them. But it kind of goes back to the idea of, if you go every single Friday, you sit in a bar and you talk to the same friends about the same shit, and you're all saying, how cool was it back when we were in high school playing football and you scored this touchdown? You're probably going to get the life that you are creating in terms of the input. And so this idea of firing boring friends doesn't mean you got to call up your friends and, kind of Trump apprentice style, say, you're fired. Instead, don't call them this weekend. What if they don't call you? And then the next weekend, if you don't call them and they don't call you, maybe you weren't as good of friends as you thought, and you kind of grow apart over time. Now that works for some friends. Some friends, you got to be intentional. If you live in a certain place and you have a certain group of friends, but you have aspirations to do something else, or a life that you want to live that is something else, then you need to be intentional about making new friends. And so get out of your comfort zone, right? Fire boring friends is a really easy way to think and remember that lesson. But it really is more about, are you being intentional about the people you hang out with? Or are you surrounding yourself with people who are they themselves living their version of an extraordinary life? And are you willing to do the uncomfortable work to seek out people or avoid people who don't fit into your specific extraordinary life that you're trying to live? That's very hard for people to do. Again, it goes back to comfort versus risk. There is risk in not being friends with the people you're friends with today. There is agency, though, in finding people who live an extraordinary life and saying, I want to be like you. I want to go and do things that you're doing. Those concepts just continue to show up in life, regardless of whether you apply it to your personal or professional life. And so we all got boring friends. You don't got to fire them all, but maybe start with one or two and replace them with extraordinary friends and see how your life goes. And you may just get addicted to, let's go find more of the extraordinary people.
Hey, I know investing in crypto is scary. It takes a real leap of faith because there are so many scams, rug pulls, and bad actors out there. It's a dangerous business, which is why 95% of people lose all their money. Well, that's why I created the London Real Investment Club, so you can access the hottest deals on the planet and use the crypto bull market to create the generational wealth that you deserve. Join my team of over 100 people from around the world that are making millions of dollars behind the scenes investing in blockchain, AI, Web3 games, DeFi, Bitcoin, and more. Don't miss out. Click the link below to book a call with one of my team now. But hurry, this bull market will end soon.
I know investing in crypto can be scary. That's why you gotta join the investment club. Pull the trigger. Let's do this.